Hello again, this is Mrs. T with another lesson from Unit 4 about family, the macro scale social institution we call family, the norms that social institution creates, and the way we understand them and learn them in our socialization process and live them out through life experience in our daily lives. So I have on the board behind me some information about a particular type of family structure that is the most common, or originally was the most common in the United States. And it's linked to the economy, it's linked to social expectations, and it's also linked, we're going to talk about how the nuclear family structure is perhaps one of the norms that contributes to poverty in the United States for certain types of nuclear families. Okay, so let's look at nuclear family. Some of you have only ever heard this word nuclear before regarding warfare, weapons, or energy, but that's not the kind of nuclear we're talking about here. This word comes from biology. Some of you remember the way you learned about the different parts of a plant or animal cell, and it had a nucleus where all of the most important things happened in that cell, and that's what this word refers to. Nuclear. Because in a nuclear family, think of this as the core unit of society. Think of a human body with tons of cells in it. How many cells does your biology teacher tell you are in the human body or any kind of plant or animal? Millions, right? Well, in society, the core unit of society that you add together to make society as a whole, in the United States, in our format of our economy and our social expectations, it's called a nuclear family. Nuclear family is a big deal. It's the basic economic unit that our social structure expects. Therefore, a nuclear family unit is an economic unit in our society. It's the core economic unit where consumption of goods and money takes place, distribution of resources on a micro scale like food and water and clothing and transportation and all those kinds of things that the money we bring into the family unit provides. So consumption and distribution of the money and the resources and the services that members of a family who are cooperating economically and living together with a commitment to cooperate economically, like we learned in the most recent chapter or the most recent lecture. A nuclear family is that core unit that is traditional in the United States. Now, I paused when I said the word traditional there because, and then I put it in air quotes just then when I repeated that word for those vision impaired people. I paused and I put emphasis on the word traditional because I am using that word to relate to the link between family as a social institution and the economy as a social institution. Because traditionally, with emphasis on the word traditional again, the nuclear family was parents, plural. You might notice on the board right now, and I'm pointing to the word parents, and it has parentheses around that S on the end. When I was learning sociology a long time ago, way before any of this stuff was gray on my head, when I was learning about sociology, in my textbook, the definition of a nuclear family was parents, plural. There was always an S on the end of it because the expectation was an economic one, that the nuclear family is only economically independent, as I have written on the board here. The nuclear family is only economically independent when you have two adults caring for the children that are produced or adopted into the household. Because there's a lot of economic cooperation going on inside a household. As a matter of fact, the word household is an economic word. It implies the economic cooperation that the members who live within it and with a commitment to live together, it implies that economic commitment that they have to each other. You have heard of the status and the roles known as breadwinner and known as caregiver. Those are very gendered terms. So in the nuclear family, these parents that are traditionally two parents, the traditional gender composition of those two parents is man, woman. Certainly biologically, that's what's necessary to produce, with just two people, that's what's necessary to produce children. However, in the sociological definition of family, nuclear family, we don't specify the sex or gender of the parents, but social facts and social norms on the macro scale usually affect our micro scale attitudes about what the sex and gender are of those two people. However, in my lifetime, since you were born and now you're in my sociology class, all sociology textbooks that have been published in recent years have updated the nuclear family definition to put this S on the end of the word parents. They put it in parentheses. When you see something written like that, it means that the S is optional. It means that the word parent can appear as singular in the definition, or it can appear as plural in the definition, and it's still a nuclear family. This is a major change in society since I was in my elementary and middle school years, and even in college when I was learning this stuff for the first time. Because the economic structure, in order for economic independence to occur, there needs to be a breadwinner and a caregiver function within the household. So breadwinner, caregiver, these are status words, and the roles associated with those statuses both of them have an economic function. Breadwinner implies in the role that money is being earned and brought into the household for economic cooperation. Caregiver is unpaid, economically valuable work that's done inside the household that traditionally, there's my word traditional again, traditionally in the economic structure, the wife or caregiver was that domestic role that enabled this unit to be economically independent. So, the wife or caregiver traditionally was unpaid, but the value of the work that I will use the pronoun she because this is a traditional format that we are talking about to try to understand this on a basic level first. So the economic value of that particular role in the household is huge. If you itemized all of the work that's done by the caregiver function in the household, from housekeeping itself to training of the children on how to do the housekeeping, how to do the personal hygiene, how to do tutoring, transportation, meal planning, nutritionist, keep on going. And for those of you out there in a household situation, whether you have one or two parents, you're nodding your head now and you're in agreement that this function of caregiver has a lot of work involved, but traditionally it's unpaid. So if you have two parents in a household, let me just call them, for the purposes of having a personality attached, let me call them Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell. So if we have two parents in the household, then traditionally Mr. Mitchell had the personal responsibility to go out and get a job and bring money back in for the household and care for his family. And Mrs. Mitchell had the personal obligation to stay within the household, make sure that it was kept according to social norms, make sure that the children were fed, make sure that the grass was mowed, whether she did it herself or not, but made arrangements for that, and just made sure that all of the functioning of the household was kept up. And that is a major economic contribution, whether Mrs. Miller went out into the public world and earned a paycheck or not. So Mrs. Mitchell. I think I said Mrs. Miller, but Mrs. Mitchell is the person I'm talking about right now. Okay, so this nuclear family structure is the traditional, how many times am I going to say the word traditional? It's the traditional economic structure of the family. Over time, as prices have gone up within our economic system, as wages have not gone up as quickly as prices have gone up, and as divorce and single parenthood is much more common now than it was when I was growing up or when I was in college. That's why parent can be singular in this definition and still apply to a nuclear family. But think back to chapter 7 or 8, I can't remember what chapter in the social stratification unit, unit 3. We learned about a trend in society called the feminization of poverty, and it used the word household in its definition. The feminization of poverty is the progressive increase of female heads of household and their children living in poverty more than any other category of people in society. Because think about the social facts that are imposed on our society about parenthood. If traditionally mother was caregiver and father was breadwinner, then if the marriage breaks up or if there's no marriage to begin with, who typically is going to be the default person to get custody of the kids or to be expected to want custody of the kids, to be expected to take care of custody of the kids, whether they have work outside the household or not? And most single female parents do have to have work outside the household, but there's still all that unpaid work inside the household. But if you do not have a second adult who is legally able to serve that function, then you have to pay caregivers like a daycare. You have to pay restaurants to cook your food or buy the pre-made stuff in the grocery store, which doesn't have the same nutritional value. Make sure that you've got all kinds of different resources available to take care of these children if they're sick from school, since you can't just take off work. Not everybody has vacation time at work or sick leave or the ability to keep their job if they have to stay home a couple of days to care for children. Not everybody has the academic skills to help their children with the tutoring that they might need. And there's a service that some upper middle class and upper middle class families might be able to afford to pay for that kind of tutoring outside the household. However, nuclear family, because it's an economic unit that is expected to be economically independent, there is a lot of pressure on us on the micro scale to take care of our dependent children according to the standard of living, the average standard of living that is expected in our lifestyle, in our culture. So during the Christmas season, for instance, when you see a lot of Christmas movies on TV, ads on TV, it doesn't even have to be Christmas. I think about the Kroger Thanksgiving commercials that are typically on, old-fashioned TV like I watch. The Kroger Thanksgiving commercials are a great example. There are 10, 12 people around a table with a huge turkey, 5 or 6 different sides. On the other end of the table, there's a huge roast beef or something. I don't know the name of the cut. And there's all kinds of desserts and pies. There's wine glasses. There's iced tea. There's all kinds of things. There's a kids table over here because those 10 or 12 people were all adults. And there's like 17 kids back here. And everybody's eating and laughing and having a great time. And the house looks like it's got 3 stories and it's decorated to the nines. And there's plenty of knives, forks, and spoons to go around. And all of this stuff that I have just rattled off as I'm recalling this Kroger commercial costs a lot of money. It costs a huge amount of money. Just the mortgage on the type of house that is depicted in these typical Christmas movies, these typical Thanksgiving commercials like I'm describing, just the mortgage on the house, just the electric bill. The electric bill on that type of house is probably more expensive than my mortgage on my little house that I live in with just under 1,600 square feet. So the family unit is an economic unit, and there are norms that the mass media even throws in our face about what the typical or the average standard of living is in the United States. So we learned about subjective poverty, which is the feeling like, gee, I should be farther ahead than I really actually am at this point in my life. Well, commercials like that, movies on the Hallmark Channel, help you judge your situation in life with what you perceive as normal. And of course, you're going to experience or likely to allow yourself to experience subjective poverty. Relative poverty that we talked about in Unit 3, which is you're not able to meet the average standard of living, but you have all your subsistence needs met. This is referring to a nuclear family. Are you able to feed and clothe, have clean water, have good, air quality and that kind of stuff for your family so that you don't have, health concerns and that kind of thing? But can you afford that huge turkey and that roast beef at the same time? If that's what you're using as the average standard of living, no, you can't, right? When I see these pictures of Christmas trees with all these presents all around and this long staircase going up behind the Christmas tree and, nuclear families, the traditional type, standing beside that Christmas tree for their Christmas picture, these are the images that we see on billboards, on posters, in restaurants, in movies. And so we often use this example of nuclear family as a standard to try to live by, but we can't do it. We can't do it. So nuclear family is parent or parents living separately. When I say living separately, that means living separately from mom, dad, aunt, uncle, cousins, siblings, and their kids. Living separately as an independent economic unit. And that's where we get this standard of living thing from. In our society, in our socialization process, which is the learning process that we begin as soon as we're born, so we learn how to function in the social situation that we were born into. In our lifetime, the expectation, according to the social facts in the United States, the expectation is that we will be a member of 2 different types of nuclear families in our lifetime. We will first be a part of what's called a family of orientation. That is one type of nuclear family in which your role is child. Your status is child, your role is child. A child in a family is learning about life. They are going through their upbringing. So a family of orientation is a type of nuclear family that we read about in kindergarten books and that we see on Hallmark movies and in the Kroger commercial, where we have a family in which you, the focus, is a child. And that child is going through their early socialization process. They're learning the basic ropes. They're young, they're going through their early life preschool and then up through high school before they're adults themselves. That's the family of orientation. But in their socialization, the future of society depends on them wanting to repeat that cycle with themselves as the parent instead of the child, where they form a nuclear family of their own. And that second type of nuclear family is called a family of procreation. This norm in our society, this expectation for people to want to reproduce, that's what procreation means, to reproduce. People are supposed to want to grow up, become economically independent, have their own household, and get married. Ooh, there's a key word that is not necessarily the case anymore for our micro-scale experiences. But marriage is part of the expectation where you will procreate children, and then your responsibility as parent continues because you're supposed to provide early socialization for the children you produce or adopt. The rest of society depends on it, and this is the way we do it in the United States. And that's why there's so much poverty. And that's why there are vocabulary terms that we use in everyday speech, like single mom. There's a single mom scholarship that our college has. And it's because that single parent is not able to be economically independent if they're trying to live up to the average standard of living in society. Instead, there's another term, another concept that is much more likely to be found outside the United States, and even with some subcultures within the United States. Instead of seeing just two generations, this describes two generations. Instead of seeing just two generations living separately from other family members and trying to be economically independent, we have something called extended family. Extended family goes beyond the nuclear description. Extended family would include grandparents, parents, children. Grandparents, siblings with their spouses and their children, all living within the same household and being economically independent as a much larger unit. You see this very often in Central America. You see this very often in Europe. You see this very often in Asia, where multiple generations, not just two, live in the same household and cooperate economically. This structure could potentially be the cure for the feminization of poverty. As a matter of fact, many people who are single parents, single females with children, often opt to live with their parents or other relatives who are adults, so that the economic contribution, whether paid or unpaid by those other adults, can contribute to the standard of living of everybody involved. So whether, if you live with grandma and she doesn't have anything but her Social Security check, but that means that you're able to go out and work, go to school, get a better job later because school is enabling you to be credentialed, so you'll get a better job, then grandma at home, who's not making very much money, still has a huge economic contribution, because when the school bus drops the kids off, there's daycare ready-made. There's probably dinner waiting. There's probably at least a grocery list that's kept track of, even if she can't go to the grocery store herself, right? So there's a huge contribution, economic contribution, that stay-at-home people have to the economic unit we call family. In the United States, nuclear family is that standard that we usually compare ourselves to, that we usually see exemplified in the mass media, stories, movies, that kind of thing. But it's much easier to be economically independent and have a higher standard of living if we expand that American norm. It's really an Estado Unidense norm, because most of the other places in the American continents use extended family support. But you might notice that we are transitioning from that independent economic unit living separately from others to a more communal kind of extended family household structure. It's going to really change things and help people benefit from poverty, to get out of poverty, if poverty is an experience that you are going through in life right now, or have gone through, or know someone who is. These norms put a lot of pressure on us. We feel like we are a failure sometimes if we can't pay our own rent, live separately. Where do we get those ideas in the back of our head? From our socialization process, from the macro scale social norms that are all around us. They control a lot of the way that we think, feel, and act. So think about that very carefully, especially when you are doing Project 4, which is going to be asking you to look at a scenario on video, look at a scenario and identify the macro scale social structure, social institution that is governing on the macro scale, the micro scale life experiences that you see played out before your eyes. So hopefully you'll have some fun with the sociological imagination focus of Project 4. It's going to be that connection between macro and micro. We've done a lot of it in this video together, and we've covered a lot of ground. So please rewind and watch this again. There's a lot to talk about. Bye, Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell.